Hi, I'm Sean Dunn. Welcome to this episode of Origin to Ambition, the entrepreneur's journey. Today I speak with Andy Gowers. Andy is the current president of Hawthorn Football Club in the Australian Football League. But prior to that, he played football himself for some 12-odd seasons for Hawthorn and Brisbane, and then embarked later on his own journey to entrepreneurship by becoming a self-employed business owner in the wealth management space. He's got a great story. His ability to link sports with business is fascinating and really interesting. And I hope you really enjoy listening to Andy's story of entrepreneurship in this week's episode. I invite you to listen on. Welcome to Origin to Ambition, the show where we explore the small business entrepreneur's journey in business. I'm your host, Sean Dunn. Let's get into it. Andy Gowers, welcome to my next episode of Origin to Ambition. I really appreciate your time for joining me here.
Thanks for having me, Sean. Looking forward to it.
Excellent. As you know, this recording's all about entrepreneurship and the journey from origins to realizing the ambition of entrepreneurship, I suppose. And so today I wanted to talk about where you started and how you found yourself on that journey towards entrepreneurship. Many people may know you as the president of Hawthorn Football Club in the AFL at the moment. But I think, and I wouldn't mind having a little chat about that if you don't mind. but I am keen to hear your entrepreneurship journey. So if you wouldn't mind taking us through, where did it start? Was it as far back as school or when?
Sure. No worries, Sean. So when I was at school, I had no idea what I wanted to do or be other than two things. One, I wanted to play football, Australian rules footy, and I wasn't always certain about making it in the then VFL, what was to become the AFL, but by the time of my last year at school, I knew I was playing the following year in the VFL because Hawthorn put me on their list. And as far as my schoolwork went, I was never the kid that was going to be the accountant or the doctor or the engineer, etc. I always had an entrepreneurial spirit. I love people. So the thing I focused on when I was at school, to be frank with you, I didn't really spend much time on schoolwork. I did as little as possible not to get kicked out, but I focused on getting to know all my classmates and my year mates, and even and I went to an all-boys school. I certainly knew everybody in my year level, and I could have a conversation with any one of them about something that they were into. If they were into reading, if they were into chess, if they were into music, if they were into sport, that was easy. But regardless of what they were interested in, I could have a conversation with. And I was at a school, I went to Xavier College, and we had circa 230 boys in each year level. So it was a bit of a task to get to know everybody, but I loved it. It was what I really focused on. So whatever the business I was going to get into in future years looked like, it had to involve working with people and helping people, and there'd be a real human element to it. I mean, I'm saying this in retrospect. I didn't know it really at the time. I was just naturally, like people. So always wanted to have my own business, and I suppose going into initially a professional sporting career, the thing that you don't know is when it's going to finish. It could last 1 year,
yes,
or it could last 15 years. Now, in my case, it lasted 12. So I had a very long career. The average career when I was playing was about, I think, 3.5 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yep.
To stay in the game for 12 years was a lot longer than the average, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And it was during the time that I was playing that I also did a marketing degree. And again, that was because I wanted to own my own business and run it and I guess explore that entrepreneurial spirit. I just had no idea in what field it would be. And as it turned out, I was guided into the wealth management area by a very close friend of mine, Matt Lally, who at the time was working with the Financial Planning Association. And he got in my ear when it was pretty obvious my professional sporting career was coming to an end. And he was the one who encouraged me to look at wealth management as a field because he said, you love helping people, and you're good at reaching out to people who need a hand. And he said the only thing you'd need to, I guess, brush up on is being able to provide good advice. And as it turned out, I learnt that skill by working at ANZ for a couple of years. And then I went out on my own after that stint. So that was circa 2010. I went out and started my own wealth management business.
I was just thinking about this because I think that's about the time you and I met each other for the first time.
Yep.
Actually,
Yep.
I think you were just starting that business. So we've actually known each other quite a while actually, as it pans out. Yes. So on that's interesting because you've said a few times there that you didn't know what it would be, but you knew you wanted your own business. You wanted to be an entrepreneur. Do you think that entrepreneurs do have that sort of an inherent desire to run their own show, regardless of what that show might end up being?
Yeah, look, I think it's a common characteristic. Yes, I don't think it's absolutely essential that you want to run your own show, and sometimes people become consultants or business owners through another laneway. I read a fantastic book when I was playing footy called The E-Myth, which I'm sure you're all over. Michael Gerber. And I had the honour and the privilege of seeing Michael speak live in Melbourne when I moved back from Brisbane. So I started my footy career with Hawthorn, finished it with Brisbane. So I moved back to Melbourne. I was looking at, my next step business-wise, and I went to a workshop with Michael Gerber in at the Arts Centre. And he asked this fantastic question. He said, what is the only reason to own a business? And all these hands went up in the audience and people were yelling out things. To be your own boss, wrong, he said. To make more money, wrong. To be more flexible, wrong. Every single answer from the audience was wrong according to him, and no one got it. And he said, the only reason to own a business is so that you can sell it. Because if you can't sell your business, you don't own one. You own a job. You just happen to employ yourself. And that really resonated with me. And I thought, okay, I'm getting a better sense now of what being an entrepreneur really means. And I think it's growing something that isn't reliant on you. That's a true business. And so I took that mindset and that approach into, the wealth management field. So I think that part, even if you don't have a so-called entrepreneurial bone in your body, I think if you have that mindset and that focus, whether you're so entrepreneurialism tends to be assimilated with risk-taking. And I say to people who are employed, well, there's a risk that you're not going to have your job anymore if your employer says, well, sorry, but there's no more job for you here anymore. AI's taken it, or there's some reason why your department, we're shutting down, we're offshoring it, or what have you. Running your own business is also a risky maneuver, but anything that you do takes inherent risk. And in my case, I just always wanted to work for myself and be a key decision maker. I didn't have to be the sole owner of the business or sole boss of the business, if you like, but because I've had partners, I had a partner in that business that I ended up selling, and in the current stuff that I'm doing, I've got partners in one of those businesses as well. So, but I think being an entrepreneur, yes, there's an inherent amount of risk taking, but there's risk in everything.
I liked the story, actually, and we've discussed that story previously between ourselves around, you have to, the purpose of the business is that you should be able to sell the business.
Yep.
And today's discussion's about you, and it's certainly not about me, but I think you know that I'm very focused with my clients on making sure their business is exit ready, even if they don't wish to exit at any particular time. Yep. So I think that that's a great lesson that you've just spoken about, because as you say, you may not be inherently entrepreneurial, but if you have a couple of lessons in mind or a framework, I suppose, you can be an entrepreneur. That'll lead me to another question later, so I'll come to that later about entrepreneurs. But what I'd like to touch on is your current endeavors. So you exited the wealth management business. So that was a successful exit. So you practiced what you preached, so to speak.
Yes.
Now, maybe actually we'll divert. So can you just give me a brief just rundown? I suppose it's probably not something that can be brief, but I think it touches on your enjoyment of people generally, and that would be your presidency at Hawthorn Football Club. Do those two things, I would suggest, or I would presume those two things are quite closely linked, liking people in order to do that job?
Yeah, I think it probably is, Sean. Yeah, so look, what I'm doing these days, so yeah, as you rightly pointed out, sold my wealth management business 4 years ago, and that was a really successful exit, and I continued on with the people that acquired that business for another almost 18 months, which was a great relationship, and I still have a great relationship with that firm now. So that was the past, and then what I saw during my time in wealth management, and I have no doubt you see this all the time also, is what I saw was the danger in terms of a family and or business partnership, running the risk of there being a succession-related issue that puts at risk their wealth and or their business. So what I mean by that is a lack of succession planning leading to arguments, all kinds of issues, and either the owners take their eye off the business because of those distractions and the business plummets in value, and or a family has a lot of internal fighting based on succession issues, and their wealth is at risk. And I've seen it firsthand, and my business partners have as well, where people start to get legal representation. They start fighting via lawyers. There's a lot of professional advice perhaps needed once you get into those kinds of arguments. So that's a business that I'm involved in, which is called Vest, and we help people avoid those issues. So avoid all those succession heartaches. So that's one thing. Another thing that I do, and I've got my website, which is andygowers.com.au, and that's helping people with what I call elite performance. So I call myself an elite performance advisor. So that's helping business owners, executives, and occasionally a professional sports person with basically getting clear about what they want to achieve in any of those areas that they're involved in, and helping hold them to account, and what I describe as reach the top of their field. So they're generally high achievers anyway, but that they haven't got to that elite level that they want to be. And the best example that I use, and I won't spend much time on this because we'll be here for too long, but Roger Federer is, I think, the best example of this, where he was a precocious talent, not harnessed properly, not coached properly. And it was actually an Australian coach that was the one that got him to really focus on being more consistent in rallies, less erratic, and certainly less aggro on the court. And he went from being promising to arguably the best player we've ever seen. And that's a great example. And just quickly, the analogy that I always use is who's in your box. If you looked at Roger Federer when he's playing tennis, or any of the people who are on the circuit now, when you see them play a major tournament, they have their own box watching them. Who's in that box? They often have their partner, but they'll have their coach. They'll have their hit up partner. They might have a massage therapist, a physio, maybe a doctor, maybe their manager, maybe an accountant, maybe their wealth manager. And they are the people that allow that person on the court to be the best they can be, to be elite. And I use that analogy all the time, because the average person, they don't have anywhere near that many people in their box. Now, maybe they don't need 8 to 10 people. Yeah. They should have 3 or 4 or 5, and they don't.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they're not going to be elite. They are on the pathway to an average life if they don't get more specialist help around them. So that's that business. And then, of course, I've got, it's a voluntary role, but I'm president at Hawthorn. And so the combination of those three things, and you're right, I think all three of them have in common a lot of interaction with people, which I absolutely love.
Do you find that your value system, your own value system, plays out clearly in business? But is it, maybe this is a strange question, but do you think that those roles all naturally align, I suppose, with your value system? I'm not sure if that makes a lot of sense, but it's, you've got the three roles that they're different. Well, yeah, they're different, but not, I suppose. Do you know what I'm sort of trying to drive at there?
Yeah, I do. Look, the short answer is they absolutely align with my values. So I've been through an exercise, Sean, and I've got 6 values. One of them is community contribution, and that's my Hawthorn role. Another one is knowledge transfer. So transferring to other people what I know and what I know to be true, and frankly have learnt through, success and failure in a sporting and business environment, or the two environments. And it's interesting because, sport, I think elite sport and experience in elite sport helps you perform in business and vice versa. But, sport can teach business a lot, and I've been able to apply sporting principles. And one of those sporting principles that I love applying is measurability. So sport is fantastic for measuring things. When you're playing on the field, everyone can look up at the scoreboard, and we don't know exactly how much time is left, but you know what you've got to do to win the game, or what you've got to do to, get over your opponent. Everyone can see that you're 7 points down, and it's the 25-minute mark of the last quarter. You know that you've got to kick 2 goals to win that game. That's in Aussie rules parlance. But yeah, so measurability, and I don't see enough measurability with either individuals or businesses. It's just not there enough. And one of my favorite stories on that, it goes back a while, but when Pepsi was trying to chase Coke in the cola wars, in every single, at head office, but in every single PepsiCo office, they had a comparison. It was all on market share. They had a comparison between Coke and Pepsi, and everybody knew when they walked into the office and when they walked out. When they came to reception, they saw, oh yeah, we're gaining on Coke, and that was what. So that measurability was right there for everybody to see. And I think that's something that sport does incredibly well.
Do you? That's interesting talking about measurability, because I think it's one of the areas I personally find that some small business owners that come to me initially and start to work, I often find that that's probably the one area that isn't happening when they come to me. Like they're not measuring. So a query will often be, we feel like we've got a good business, or we feel like we're good at what we do. And actually, we'll talk about that. Being good at business and being good at what you do can be two entirely separate things, but I might ask you about that in a moment. But it's that often not having a handle on metrics that I find is the weak spot in small business. And again, it is small business. They don't have, they don't have a big 4 accounting firm advising them, or, so on, large management consultancy firms. They're small businesses. So I guess what I'm saying is this, not a handle on it, but sometimes actually a resistance to doing it because it seems hard. So I'd love to hear your take on it, because of this, your sporting and business take on those things.
Yeah, look, it can be hard. And look, if people are not used to it, and I've had multiple examples in my life where, and I'll give you one quick one, and it's actually not a business example, it's actually a personal one. So I did a marathon a few years ago, and someone that watched it said that they were inspired, and one day in their lifetime they'd like to do a half marathon. And I started laughing when they started talking about this this intention. And they said, what are you laughing about? And I said, I think that's the most wishy-washy goal I've ever heard. One day in your lifetime you'd like to. You're never going to do it. Yeah. So we jumped on the internet, and I booked this person in for a half marathon.
Yeah.
And then we ended up running it together, 7 months later. The measurability of things and the other part too, I reckon there are two parts, Sean. There's firstly setting the goal or the intention or the commitment.
Yes.
Right? There's that part. And then the second part is being held to account. Now, small business owners, if they own the business themselves, they're an individual owner, no one's holding them to account.
Yeah, that's right.
Unless they've got a system within their business, or it could be an external person that holds them to account. So one of the things I do in my elite performance business is I set up accountability partnerships. So you have two people that will hold each other accountable, and I've got one myself. And maybe I'll break that down in a little bit of detail. So my accountability partner and I, Francesco and I, we meet every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. So that's the cadence of it every week. It's up to an hour. Sometimes it's less. It's in person every fourth meeting. So once a month we meet in person, and every other time it's on the phone. We make 3 commitments every time we meet. And we go back on the last week and we talk about how we went with our last 3 commitments. So how'd the last week go? Did we actually achieve them? And if so, how do you feel about it? If not, why not? And, as a bit of a joke, he calls himself the drill sergeant. When we first started working together in this way, it was going really well, but I'm used to being held to account by coaches in front of plenty of other people, out on the ground, in a meeting room, being told very explicitly whether I'm doing a good job or not. So feedback is almost instant, and it's quite public in front of your peers. So that's quite when you first are involved at an AFL level or any elite sport, I would imagine that part of it takes some getting used to. Now, I'd had training on it all the way through juniors and so on, but never to that extent. At AFL level, you put up or shut up. So it was a real lesson. So I've been trying to bring some of that, I guess, philosophy to accountability partnerships. And I think you're right. Most people are just not used to this at all. So, I talked before about who's in the box, who's in your box watching you play and watching you perform. Your accountability partner can play a really pivotal role in holding you to account, because I think the average human is built for comfort, not for success. So if you need other people to help you, hold yourself to account. And even if you're not doing it for yourself, and ultimately you are, but you've got someone who every Tuesday morning is going to say, Andy, you said you're going to do these 3 things. Are you serious or not? And you can even take it a step further, Sean, by having a reward and a punishment. So your reward for doing these 3 things is X, and your punishment is Y. And with your punishments, you can get creative with them and set something that you would hate to have to do.
Yes.
And that is a really good reason to commit to doing what you're committed to do.
Yeah.
Just one quick joke that I just want to share about commitment. So an old coach of mine, Alan Jeans, very famous coach.
Yes.
Used to now and then talk about the he'd say, you guys have got to have a look at your commitment. Are you actually committed? And he'd say, when you're next sitting down for your bacon and eggs, just have a think about who's more committed, the chicken or the pig.
Yeah.
The pig's given his life. The chicken's just laid an egg. You guys have got to be committed.
Yeah. Yeah. That's actually, you talk about punishment and reward. And if I can remember where I heard this, I will credit that person. But I wish I could remember. It doesn't matter. The lesson is, he was saying there are people who are carrot people, and there are people who are stick people. So there are people who are just naturally inclined towards the reward and just naturally seek reward. And then there are those people who basically need the stick just to make sure they keep bouncing off the bottom. Is entrepreneurship not really suited for stick people, just generally speaking?
I'd say mostly it's not.
Yeah.
I'd say mostly it's a carrot. It's a carrot kind of world.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think entrepreneurs, in my experience, tend to be more optimistic. They tend to be more positive. They tend to be more, upbeat in their nature. It's not a blanket rule, but I'd say mostly they are. They tend to be more like that. And I've got to say, from a sporting point of view, and it's quite similar. When you were talking about that analogy of the carrot and the stick, I immediately thought about players that I played with who responded best to criticism rather than praise. And there's no doubt most people respond better to praise. Most people want a pat on the back more than, being told, that was no good what you did there. And there are a few high performers who were exceptional, and they did respond really well to being given a prod. But most people, I think, would prefer a pat on the back.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a question that I ask generally towards the end of this chat, but I'll touch on it now because I think it's related. I usually ask my guests, is entrepreneurship for everyone? Is entrepreneurship for everyone?
Look, I don't think it is. I talked about risk at the start of this discussion, and there are some people who just do not agree that there's as much risk working for someone else than working for yourself.
Yes.
And I've worked in multiple businesses, most of which I've owned and run, and that's just the way I prefer it. I mean, I think that it is employment for everybody. No, it's not. Some people like me, I'm built to run my own show.
Yes.
Some people are not built for that. They just can't handle the stress of it.
Yes.
Or the risk, or they think they can't, and so they don't. They don't go down that pathway, and that's fine. And look, if there are risks to everything, though, and that's the way I look at it. I just think for my own peace of mind, I love the flexibility. I love the decision making autonomy. I love I love every element of it, to be honest. I really do. I just love, I love pulling off a deal when, it's a concept, and then all of a sudden you're doing what you dreamt about, what you thought you could do. You tested it. You spoke to people. They backed you. I remember when I resigned from ANZ Bank, and I was walking down Glenferrie Road, Hawthorn, and I'd literally just submitted my resignation form. So I was on gardening leave, and I bumped into an old mate. And, the classic question, oh, what are you up to these days? And I said, well, actually, I've just resigned. I'm just about to set up my own wealth management business. And he said, I'll be your first client. Now, that moment wasn't significant in terms of, a return or, I've worked on lots and lots of big deals, but that moment was so pivotal for me. That was such a little pat on the back. If you go back to the analogy before of the carrot and the stick, it was such a great moment for me to have someone say, I'll be your first client.
Yeah, absolutely. So this leads me into, in my experience, if I ask people, a lot of small business clients that come on board often go into business not thinking about really being an entrepreneur. I don't mean this in a disparaging way at all, but more from a point, almost accidentally is how I would put it. Almost, I love making widgets. It's my passion. I know that sounds a bit crazy. But I love making widgets, and it's my passion. Yeah. So I'm going to make widgets. And I think that's often how these small businesses actually start.
Yes.
Whereas there's a big difference between being passionate. I think that's important to be passionate.
Yeah.
But there's a big difference between being passionate about your skill or your craft or your trade and being a business owner and being an entrepreneur.
100%. Well, I mean, that's the premise of that book I was talking about before, the E-Myth.
Yeah.
The woman who's the key character in that book is a fantastic baker. She makes the most amazing cakes and pastries and so on, but then has to learn the hard way that just because you're a great baker doesn't make you a great bakery owner. And so she has to take the leap between being really good at the skill to being better at running the business side of things. And there are so many elements to a business. There are so many people. There's a community around business that you need, not just on the staffing side, but also on the supplier side and also on the customer side. So you've got multiple people involved in a business. So it is a big leap, no doubt.
Because I think this comes back to something you said earlier about who's in your box. Is that the value of, for example, business and personal financial advice, that you can have someone on that element worrying about that side of things, creating and protecting, while you focus on what you're good at?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. So look, any business transaction, and this is getting right down to tin tacks, the service or product that you're buying, you need to get more value than you pay. It's really simple. It's a simple equation. And when it comes to business advice and or financial advice, whatever you're paying, if you're getting more value back, you're ahead. And the clients or prospects that are fixated on cost are focused on the wrong thing. They need to think about, and they need to focus on and ask, what kind of value will I get in return for the amount of money that I'm going to pay you? And feel confident that that's going to be the value exchange. So, yeah, business advice and or financial advice, it's really that simple and that hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's interesting as well, because oftentimes, I'm saying these for example, for our listeners. I'm not saying it. I'm not really trying to talk about me at all. But it's interesting that when you speak with a new business owner client and we discuss growth goals and having a growth mindset. I know that sounds cliched, a growth mindset, but we talk about growth goals, and it's interesting the amount of times that I encounter clients that have never really heard that. Now, I know that might sound like I've just made that up, but oftentimes, and I'm not knocking a certain profession here, accountants, but oftentimes they've spoken to their accountant and it's often a cost-cutting discussion.
Yep.
I think, and I did accounting. I studied accounting at uni, so I'm not knocking accounting, but it tends to be the nature of the training, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about big consulting firms. I'm talking about, suburban accountants are typically trained that way. So that's not a criticism. It's just what it is. Mm-hmm. So when you speak to a client about a growth mindset, I think that feeds into getting value, if that makes sense. If you focus on where we can get to and how we can get there, oftentimes the cost, does pay for itself. I mean, you've got to weigh that up, of course, but do you find that as well? Like, that's part of business ownership is growth. You're growing or you're dying.
Definitely. And look, I think the other thing to always be mindful of as a business owner is the value of your business is a reflection of two things. The multiple that someone is likely to pay you and how much profit you're making every year, or EBITDA. So what your business is worth is a function of those two things. Again, a really simple equation. So if the advice that you're receiving from a business advisor like yourself, and I'll just focus on the business for a second, is helping you work on both increasing your profit and increasing your multiple, then your business is going to be worth a lot more over time. Now, the ultimate test is when you come to sell it, and there are experts that can help you prepare for that. And having been through the process, it's a very valuable thing to know how that works. So I would encourage, and I'll tell you what, it's a very sobering discussion when you think about, because I think a lot of business owners look at their business as their super, and a lot of them talk this way. Oh, my business is my super. Oh, and there are plenty of business owners who don't have much in super. Not working with you, Sean, I'm sure you would have trained them beautifully. But you do come across business owners that say to you, "My business is my super."
Yeah, it's common. That's common. Yes.
Yep. And then the next question is, "Oh, okay. Well, what's your so-called super worth today?" I've got no idea. Well, do you know how businesses are valued? Well, sort of. Okay. And then to actually break down, all right, well, what's your EBITDA today? And what's the average multiple in your industry? Now, and then there are two questions that the likes of Dominion Capital could help with. All right, well, how do you improve the profitability? And that's the positive strategic question to ask. And then how do I improve my multiple? Who'd be interested in me that's got a higher multiple than I've got? So the combination of that, now that is where the gold is, Sean, as you well know. But if you don't actually have a good look under the bonnet of your business, you don't get to those really key moments. And the ones that have those breakthroughs, they never look back.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's all incredibly valuable advice, Andy. That's really well put. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. What's next for andygowers.com.au? What's the next? What's the next phase or the next growth phase?
Yeah. Well, I've got, as I described before, some one-on-one clients. I'm going to be running some what I'm calling intensive, 2-day intensive in Queensland later this year, in mid-November this year, which will be good. Small groups, sort of 10 to 12 would be ideal. And I'm going to end up training people in how to hold each other accountable. That'll be a really, really full-on couple of days, but I'm really looking forward to that. And it's the knowledge transfer bit that I touched on before. Earlier next year, I'm going to run some events in combination with Francesco, who I mentioned before, events called Live to Lead. So that's leadership and personal growth workshops. So that they're one-day workshops. So they're going to be in February next year. We're running those in Melbourne, Sydney, possibly Brisbane, but certainly Melbourne and Sydney. So my plan there, Sean, is to work with, small cohorts and help them train them and think about and plan for and mobilize on who is in their box.
Yeah.
Have you got the right people in there?
Yeah.
And are they giving you the advice that you need to be elite?
Yes.
I mean, if being elite is not something that's on your radar, that's fine.
Yes.
But if you want to go from what's the expression by Jim Collins, good to great?
Good to great.
You need to have great advisors around you and great people around you.
Yes.
And that's you have to do the work, but you need people around you that are going to give you good advice, hold you accountable, and help you along the way.
I love it, Andy. I love it. I think a lot of people get a lot of value out of that type of work. So they can head to your website to check that out. Is that fair to say? Yes.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yep.
Yep.
I think that it's excellent. And wondering whether there is another episode in us at a later date, and potentially more on. I'd love to talk to you about leadership, but a bit of a different flavour.
Sure.
I reckon you'll know this. So I'm reading Second Set of Eyes at the moment.
Yep.
Cody Royal. So.
Yep.
And I'm halfway through, and the lessons in that book are really interesting. I think you can apply them to sports and business, as you've already touched on. So
great.
If I can stretch the friendship, maybe I'll ask you to come back and we'll have a bit of a chat about leadership on another episode, if that's possible.
Yeah, absolutely love to, Sean. That'd be great.
All right. Well, Andy Gowers, former Xavier College student, ticking over to AFL football long-term player to entrepreneur and president of Hawthorn Football Club. So it's an interesting and fascinating story, Andy, and I really appreciate you giving me the time today to talk us through some really good lessons on entrepreneurship and business.
Thanks, Sean. I'll leave you with one thing, which is a quote from the great late Tom Hafey.
Yes.
Which is, the best is yet to come.
That is a good one. Yeah, I appreciate it. Andy, thank you very much. Very much appreciated. We'll speak soon.
Good on you, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And that's all for this episode of Origin to Ambition. Thanks for tuning in. To make sure you don't miss our next conversation, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen in. For more information, you can visit us at dominiumcapital.com.au, and we'll see you next time.